I used the work for my best friend's parents' restaurant. I did deliveries for them and would sometimes help clean tables or whatever too. The job in itself was fine, but it felt very uncomfortable to have my friend's parents as my boss. I thought it wouldn't be too bad after a while, but it just never got better. They hated every time something wouldn't go exactly as planned, and they also scheduled me and my friend on opposite days. So it didn't even feel like we worked together, which was the whole point of me taking the job. This happened during my third and final month working there. It was a regular night to start, getting a few quick deliveries, but I really slowed down toward the back half of the night. My friend's dad hated it when it was slow, because I'd be standing around waiting for orders, and he'd always be grumpy about it, even though it wasn't my fault. Around 8:30, which was an hour since my last delivery, and 30 minutes until the end of my shift, he picked up a phone call, and I overheard him say that we could deliver. Afterward, he made the food and handed me the bag to deliver, but when I searched the address up, it was 40 minutes away. Of course, I complained because by then my shift was over in 15 minutes, and this delivery would take nearly an hour and a half. He didn't care. I could tell he was just upset about me waiting around, which again was not my fault, but after a brief argument, I did as he said. 40 minutes was pretty far away for our small town, so I had no idea where this address was. By the time I was 2 minutes away, it was just before 10 p.m. There were no houses nearby from what I could see until the last minute of the drive, when it had me turn down a small street that led to a row of maybe 6 houses. They all looked old and outdated, and they were the only houses I'd seen in the last 5 minutes of driving. As I slowly passed by each house and looked at their numbers until I found the right one, then I parked on the street right next to the driveway. I'm not gonna lie. This place gave me some spooky vibes. It was so far from everything, and the houses themselves were just old and creepy. I got out and brought the bag up to the doorstep, then rang the doorbell. Nobody came to the door, so I tried knocking. It was late, and I wanted to get this over with, so I was getting impatient. As I waited, I looked around. The street had no cars on it, or in any of the driveways, and none of the actual lights were on inside any of the houses. I carried the bag back to my car and called the customer. They didn't pick up, so I just sat in my car and tried to think of what to do next. They hadn't paid for the food yet, so I couldn't just leave it on their doorstep. Then I saw a light move around inside the house. I got out and saw the light move through the downstairs windows and over to the front door. Then it turned off. A second later, the door opened. There was a young man in his early 20s standing in the doorway holding a large flashlight in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. I walked up and asked if he had ordered the food. He nodded and apologized for taking so long to answer the door. I said it was all right and tried to hand him the bag, but he just held up both of his hands to show me they were full, then asked if I'd kindly put the food on the kitchen table for him. I wasn't sure if he was joking or not at first, because he easily could have just put the flashlight or grocery bag down for a second. But then I realized he was serious. I peeked around him, and from the short entryway, I could tell that there was something off about this place. It was dusty all over, and it looked empty. Once I saw that and thought about the flashlight being used instead of the regular house lights, I was almost sure that this place was a vacant house. The man was still looking at me and waiting for a response. "Sorry, I'm actually in a rush. If you could just pay really quick, then I'll leave the bag right here on your porch." He didn't like that answer, and he showed it with his face. He set down the grocery bag and took one step out of the doorway and onto the porch. I backed up to not be too close to him. There was something in his eyes that told me he was about to do something, and I wasn't going to wait for whatever that was to happen. I dropped the bag and sprinted for my car, driving away as the man watched me intently from the porch. I was shaking for most of the drive back, unsure of what could have just happened. Of course, though, when I told my friend's dad about what happened, all he seemed to care about was that I didn't make the man pay. For that reason, I just quit right there on the spot. I knew my friend would be upset, but I'd had enough of his parents being disrespectful to me for doing nothing wrong. After that, things were pretty heated, and I was thinking more about that than I was about the man who lured me to a vacant house and likely tried to rob me, or even worse. Being so distracted, I never called the police, not until it was too late anyway. Thankfully, I wasn't dumb enough to go inside the house, because if I had, I probably never would have returned from that delivery. I used to work at Domino's. They close at 3 a.m. on weekends, and being that I was taking an off year during college at the time of the story, my boss took advantage of that and always threw me on the 9 o'clock to 3 a.m. shifts. There would always be at least 3 people working that late. 1 to cook the pizzas, 1 to take orders, and 1 to do any needed deliveries. This night, the one cooking the pizzas was Jeff, a 28-year-old Italian guy who worked 2 jobs. He was always in a bad mood, so when he told me to deliver something, I did it without complaints. So, being a Saturday night, it wasn't uncommon to get calls for deliveries past 2 a.m. around 2:30. I was told to deliver 2 pizzas to an address that I still vaguely remember, 27 Crocker Drive or something close to that. I took my stupid beat-up 2002 Honda Civic up the road for 5 minutes, the only main road that cuts through our tiniest town. I live in the Manchester Township area in Jersey, containing a whole lot of nothing but trees everywhere I drive. There was a dark one after merging off the main road onto smaller roads with no streetlights. The only light that could be seen for miles were my headlights. I turned off the public road onto a dirt road with a private property sign posted outside. It seemed I had arrived at the house I was delivering to, and suddenly I heard a bang reverberating through my car, followed by a weakened sense of handling of my car, as well as a repeating flopping sound. I knew for certain I'd just got a flat tire. I stopped the car at once and got out to confirm the front right tire was completely flat. I could see through the headlights that the house was walking distance from my car, though. Instead of calling my insurance company, it would make more sense to deliver the pizza and also ask that person for help. I got to the deck of the house. It was an average-sized house completely enclosed by trees, as were most of the houses around here. The lights were on inside, but all the blinds were shut. I rang the bell, and quickly, a normal-looking young man answered the door. Before exchanging the pizzas for money, I told the man about the predicament I'd just found myself in. A look of concern came over his face as he handed me the money and I handed in the pizzas. He came outside to take a look at my car with me. It was a 30-second walk from the house. He got to my car and started analyzing the tire. He said he could help me. He just needed his tools from inside. I started questioning what I could have hit on his dirt driveway, and he yelled out to me, "Don't worry about it." As I was walking down his road, I walked a bit further, kind of ignoring him, when I noticed a spike strip in the road, a very small one, but undoubtedly what I hit. I couldn't see any other reason for that to be there other than him putting it there deliberately. I started thinking over the possibilities of what could be going down, so I pretended I didn't see the spike strip and walked back, saying I didn't find anything. He looked at me. I was worried he might have been suspicious, but then he turned away and said he was going inside to get some tools. God only knows what he meant by tools. I waited for him to get to his front door before I got back in my car, turned the car on, and threw it in reverse. I was not sticking around there to find out what he was doing. I heard the flat tire wobble on the dirt road as my car slowly rolled in reverse. I made a point of avoiding the spike strip this time. My car pulled out of the private dirt road onto the concrete road. I took one last look down the man's driveway to make sure he wasn't following me. Then I took off. I couldn't drive too fast though, and risk damaging my wheel. I stayed at a steady 10 to 15 miles per hour. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw something behind my car. The man running after my car. I had no choice but to step on it, forcing me to cringe as I could literally feel the damage being done to my wheel. The distance between my car and the man got greater until he was out of sight. After turning back onto the one main road that I had mentioned earlier, I slowed down the speed a little bit back to 10 to 15. It was a long ride back, about 20 minutes since I had to drive slow. When I got back, the police would be closing in 10 minutes. But I had to return the Domino's sign that they make us put on our cars when doing deliveries. Jeff was upset with me that I took so long until I told him the whole story. The woman who was also working the same shift as us listened in with a look of shock on her face the whole time. When the time came to close, Jeff told me I should just drive home slow since I lived down the block and that I should take care of it tomorrow. The two went off to their cars and drove away. I sat in my car for a little bit, thinking. Eventually, I turned my car on and started my slow drive back to my house. I noticed, however, that a car without its lights on was following close behind me for a while. So I pulled over in front of some small house to see if they would do the same. The car passed me, but then pulled over on the same side of the street a little further down. I started to panic, knowing it had to be the man who figured that he'd find me at the Domino's that he ordered from. I couldn't lead him to my house, so even though I didn't know for certain if it was him, I had to be overly paranoid and call the cops. I had police come to my exact location for fear of being followed. After 5 to 10 minutes of waiting, a cop car slowly rolled down the street, and I beeped my horn to stop him. He stopped in reverse so that his windows were lined up with mine, and then we both rolled them down. I pointed at the car in front of me with its lights off, sitting a little further in front of me. But just then, that car zoomed out from its parked position, lights still off, instantly disappearing down the road into the night. The cop put his lights on and sped after him without saying a word. I didn't know if he wanted me to follow him, but I couldn't with my tire. So I drove home as quick as I could and parked my car in the driveway. I still don't know if that cop caught that driver. Somehow I doubt it, but I like to imagine he did. Either way, I always made sure to watch my back every time I drove home after that night, and I quit that job 2 months later. I work as a new breed driver at night to make a little extra cash Friday, and Saturday nights are always the busiest because everyone's either home or with friends and ordering food, so those were usually the nights I would work. I got a request on a Saturday night at 1 a.m. to pick up McDonald's for a guy named Kyle. He lived a few minutes away from my current position, so I punched in the nearest McDonald's, which was like a 2-minute drive away, and picked up his order. It was a small order. I think he only wanted 2 hamburgers. He lived like 5 to 7 minutes away from the McDonald's. I followed the app's directions to the house, and eventually, it led me to a short dead-end street that veered off another dead-end street. The house was the last one on this dead-end road. It sat right next to a line of trees that ran alongside a highway. Though it was pretty much dead at this hour given how late it was, I didn't want to ring the bell, so I called this Kyle guy's number. It rang once, then went to voicemail, so I hung up. Then I got a text from him, though he told me to come to the door, and so I did. I got to the big wooden front porch of the house, and soon the front door opened. A bald guy opened the door, and he didn't look very old. He looked to be in his 30s, yet his head was completely bald. Maybe he was sick, or just liked that look, so I didn't judge. However, his breath was disgusting, and he seemed to be quite drunk, so that was a little off-putting. The payments were done through the app, so usually there was no need to wait around for money. But this time, this Kyle guy asked me to put the pizza on his kitchen table while he ran to fetch a tip. I didn't object to free money, so I waited in his kitchen, which by the way was only lit by a small outlet-sized nightlight, so it was pretty dim in there. The whole kitchen smelled rather disgusting, though I didn't know what it was. Kyle was taking awfully long down the basement fetching this tip, so I started to wonder a bit. I stepped into the living room, which was adjacent to the kitchen. The TV was on in there, which was the only reason I could see anything. However, the stench was even greater in this room. Then I noticed that the back door was slid half open. Maybe he was airing out whatever that putrid odor was. For the hell of it, I walked to the back door, expecting to get a quick breath of fresh air, but the smell only got worse. Finally, I stepped outside onto the man's back deck. I heard flies, the sound of a swarm of flies right by the door. Then I guess a motion-sensing light saw my movement and turned on, revealing 2 big black garbage bags stuffed with 2 long objects. The smell was unbearable. It took me a second to catch on to what I was most likely looking at. Suddenly, waiting around for the tip didn't seem like a good idea anymore. I went back inside and rushed to the front door. And just then, I heard Kyle emerge from the basement, holding a few singles in his hand. He saw me as I was about to open the door and asked where I was going. I had to come up with something, so I said I was just rushing to check if I had something in my car. He said, "Oh, okay," as he came over to me and handed me the bills. Then he turned to the back door to the porch where the light was still on. Then he looked back at me with his gummy smile now disappearing. He asked me in a firm voice if I went to his backyard. I told him no, and he just stared at me, not saying anything. I didn't give any AAA anymore. I opened the door and walked myself out, but not without him grabbing my shoulder as I got onto the stoop. I yanked his hand off my shoulder and ran to my car. I saw him run back inside with the front door still open. I turned my car on when I sat and watched his front door, curious to see if he'd come back out. And he did. He came back out running full speed for my car with a big metal rod in his hand. I drove away from his house, ready to call the police and report him. I called when I got down the block, making sure to leave him no time to dispose of those potentially dead bodies. I waited down the block and saw police cars pull up, literally within 2 minutes. I watched the whole thing as I told the police where to go. In fact, Kyle, if that's his real name, and already started moving the bags, which did contain dead bodies, to the bushes in his backyard. Everything about this guy was off from leaving the back door open to reveal dead bodies to a pizza delivery boy. He may have been deranged, but he also wasn't the smartest man around. I signed up for Doordash just to see if it was as good as they advertised it. Initially though, it took me a whole month to finally get myself to take on my first delivery. But from then on, I did a couple of deliveries a day and was really happy with the results. A couple of months after that, I quit my grocery job and started dashing every day after school and even on most weekends. On this night, I was working extra late because it was a holiday weekend. I was driving from 8 p.m. until 2 a.m., pretty much just going back and forth from the 24/7's McDonald's. A little past 2, I picked up another McDonald's order and went en route to the customer. It was set to be delivered at some sort of a warehouse, and in the notes, it said to go in through the side doors and drop it off at the front desk. When I got there, I pulled into this huge parking lot. It was mostly empty, only having a few semi-trucks in it. The building was definitely an old warehouse, being just a large rectangle with a few windows and a single door at the front. I checked one more time to make sure I had it right to deliver it through the side door, then pulled around to the side and parked. The side door was one of those really heavy metal doors with a small glass window. I looked through that tiny window and didn't see anything but a small and dark entrance room. But the glare from my car's headlights made the window reflective and hard to see through. I swung it open and was immediately taken aback. It was just as dark as it seemed through the window, and it only had a tiny wall light in the corner that was more of a dim safety light. There was no front desk, so I walked around the corner and stood at the end of a long unlit corridor. I knew that most places that have night shift workers don't keep on the unnecessary lights, but this seemed excessive. I couldn't even see the end of the hallway. So if I were to walk down there, I would be walking into complete darkness. I took my phone out and checked now for a third time to see if I'd gone to the wrong place or through the wrong door. Everything seemed right, but there wasn't any way I was going to walk through that hallway. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how quiet the whole building was. No machinery moving or people talking, not a sound at all. I decided to call the customer. I clicked on their name and had to dial the number. And just a moment later, I heard a phone ring echo from the other end of the hallway. After another few seconds, it rang again, but it was closer and louder this time. I stared into this empty corridor and could barely make out the faint glow of someone's phone. "Hey, I got an order here from Doordash. I'm gonna leave it right here for you," I said, setting the bag down in front of me. The figure of a large man started to come out of the dark corridor, but they didn't say anything. I waited another second, but as they got closer, it just really seemed unnerving the way they were walking so fast and not speaking. I had this feeling like someone was going to jump out behind me or something, and overall, I was a little freaked out. I turned around and walked quickly out of the door and back to my car. A few moments later, I saw some movement from behind the small glass window on the door just before I pulled away. That whole thing gave me chills and had me call it a night and go straight home. In the end, I chose to believe it was just a weird situation all around, but nothing really happened. A couple of days would go by, and on Monday evening while I was driving again, I got a strange call. It was from the police department. What happened next was more complicated than it had to be. But basically, they questioned me about why I was at that specific warehouse at 2:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. Apparently, they had security footage of my car pulling up. After explaining I was just a Doordash driver, and I proved it with the delivery receipt, they told me what was going on. They said that the workers came back from their holiday weekend where the warehouse was not in operation and found a Doordash delivery sitting in the middle of the hallway. Whoever was there had broken in and ordered with a fake account, which is all scary in its own right. But the creepiest part is that they didn't even take the bag of food. It's pretty obvious that they were looking for something else. I don't know what they wanted from me, but I can only assume that if I had stayed and waited for the man, something terrible would have happened.